Hello, I'm Ina Shrevinsky. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In this episode, we dive into the latest grim updates from the Ukrainian battlefield, where the situation remains dire. Russian forces are making significant advances, Ukrainian troops are struggling to hold their positions, and the human cost is mounting. It is a bleak picture, but let us break it down. What has changed on the Russian side? How much Western aid is Ukraine receiving now? And is it enough to withstand the multi-pronged assault? We'll try to answer all these questions, but first, let's take a look at our report.
Russian forces attacked the Kharkiv region on May 10th, crossing the internationally recognized state border. This is unusual due to the fact that in previous cases, when Ukraine counterattacked all the way to the border, a sort of unofficial truce would take place, and neither party would cross in force. Ukraine's initial worry over the incursion was serious enough for President Zelensky to cancel his upcoming foreign visits. However, after more than a week of combat, the Russians advanced no more than 10 kilometers. Kiev now says the current attack has been halted, but is worried about a potential second wave.
No, the Russians don't have the numbers necessary to do a strategic breakthrough. We don't believe. More to the point, they don't have the skill and the capability to do it, to operate at the scale necessary to exploit any breakthrough to strategic advantage.
The Russian offensive took place following months of shortages of material on the Ukrainian side, largely due to disagreement with U.S. Congress. Shipments have now begun arriving in large numbers again, providing Ukraine with much-needed artillery shells and HIMARS missiles. These weapons will likely immobilize Russian troops, transforming the Kharkiv incursion into another static sector of the front line. Included in the new U.S. aid package is a considerable number of ATACMS missiles, the first of them apparently being used in Crimea. Since early May, strikes against bases around Sevastopol have intensified, with reported successful hits on Russian aviation. Russian glide bombs have been a major headache for Kiev, causing a significant number of casualties in even the most fortified positions. The ability to destroy Russian aircraft on the ground, far from the front lines, may complicate their movements, saving the lives of many Ukrainian soldiers.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Ukrainian civilians are being evacuated from the border regions with Russia. This isn't a precautionary measure, it's a desperate necessity. The east-west highway in the eastern Donetsk region is now under threat as Russian forces continue their relentless push. This critical route is vital for Ukraine's logistics and troop movements, and its potential loss could have severe implications. This is more than just a loss of territory. It's a symbolic blow to Ukrainian morale and a tangible gain for Russian forces. And to top it all off, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has cancelled all foreign trips, choosing to stay and lead his nation through the crisis. Russian troops have moved into a grey zone, Ukrainian territory not fully controlled by either side. In the second part of last week, Russian units entered the town of Vovchansk, just 5 kilometers from the border, marking some of the fiercest fighting in the north. The amount of territory ceded by Ukrainian troops in recent months is greater than the early months of the Russian invasion in February 2022. Despite these setbacks, however, Western military officials are downplaying the chances of a broader Russian breakthrough. But they do acknowledge that Russia has the ability to make local advances, and they certainly have done so. Ukraine's forces are stretched thin. By spreading Ukrainian forces along a wide front, Russia is overcoming the obvious limitations of its undertrained army. President Zelensky's visit to Kharkiv and the dismissal of the commander in charge of the Kharkiv front underline the seriousness of the situation. So why is Ukraine struggling? Two main reasons stand out. First, the months-long pause in US weaponry due to political deadlock in Washington, D.C. The second reason is manpower. Ukrainian troops are outmanned and exhausted. Casualty rates are soaring, and while Russia faces similar issues, it has a larger population to draw from and a more effective recruitment system. Mobilization reforms were signed into law last month, but it will take time to train and equip new troops. This delay has forced commanders to redeploy exhausted units, leading to further strain on the front lines. Ukraine needs to quickly muster its reserves, stabilize its lines, and reinforce its defenses. While the size of the Kharkiv invasion force isn't large enough to capture the city, Russia is leveraging its numerical advantage to extend the active front lines, stretching Ukrainian troops thinner. Ukraine has shown it can use newly supplied US weaponry effectively, but whether this will be enough to stem the new Russian advance remains uncertain. And now, here to shed more light on this story is our guest, Rostislav Khotin from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So how would you describe the situation in and around Kharkiv? There are many conflicting reports. We know that the situation is difficult, but is it really quite as bad as some media outlets would like us to believe?
Until now, situation has been difficult there because there was a sudden advance of Russian troops who crossed the border. Russia massed around 50,000 troops on each side of the border of the Kharkiv stretch of Ukrainian-Russian border, and used about roughly 30,000 to enter Ukraine from two directions. Especially situation was extremely difficult near the town of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region. The thing was that there was no the first line of Ukraine or the Ukrainian defense was actually absent because it was supposed to be built 2-3 kilometers near the border, but the workers could be shelled easily from the Russian side. So Ukraine built the first proper defense line roughly 10-12 kilometers from the border, and the next one around 20 or even 30 kilometers from the border. So there was in fact no first line of defense, only second and third. That's why
there were some discussions around that, right? I mean, there were some accusations that it should have been done and it wasn't. Others said that it could not have been done because it would have to be essentially accomplished under constant Russian fire. Where does the truth lie in this regard? Does it lie in between, to use the cliched statement? How would you describe this?
The thing was that it was extremely difficult to build the first line, just 2 to 3 kilometers from the border, being constantly shelled from the Russian side. That's the first thing. Second thing, there were questions raised about the timing, that Ukraine was slow in building defenses. And also there was even a question asked for the local governor, Mr. Sinigubov in Kharkiv region, whether the money were well spent, and so why it took so long and why it took so kind of difficult for Ukraine to build these defense lines in time for Russian advance, and why Ukraine wasn't prepared for such Russian advances. But generally speaking, now situation has been stabilized more or less. As Ukrainian officials said, the defense line has been corrected and fortified. So Russian advance has been slowed down. They advance about 8 up to 10 kilometers maximum from the border. So now the situation is under Ukrainian control. It's not as bad as it used to be last week.
So what's next for Kharkiv? Again, we have conflicting reports, conflicting suggestions. We have Vladimir Putin saying that it is not their intention to occupy Kharkiv, and we've already learned not to take anything that Russia says at face value. We also had one of the top NATO commanders saying Russia doesn't really have the manpower to take Kharkiv. It can cause serious damage, though. It has recently attacked a lakeside resort, again killing civilians. So once again, it's terrorist tactics. And there was this very confusing interview given by Russian oppositionist Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who had this grim prediction that Kharkiv would fall this year. Next year, it's Odessa. It seemed rather strange, though. It didn't seem to actually vibe with most predictions regarding the military situation there. So what would you say is the most likely scenario? What could be Russia's intentions there? What could be the outcome?
The thing is that Ukraine has so far enough resources to keep Kharkiv defended, to keep Kharkiv protected. And Russia is lacking manpower and reserves to take over Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Having said that, is the Russian strategic aim or dream, if you want, to take the city of Kharkiv. But they unlikely to succeed. They even thought to take Kharkiv for Putin's inauguration at the beginning of May. So they spent a lot of efforts to take Kharkiv for Putin's inauguration or for the 9th of May, the Victory Day in Russia.
Well, that was unrealistic, clearly.
They remarkably failed, of course. And now, even now, with this advance on Vovchansk, Russia still, first of all, Russian troops have been stopped by Ukrainian side, and they lack resources and strength to take on Kharkiv, to be honest. But having said that, the thing is that Kharkiv is unprotected from the air. Russia constantly strikes Kharkiv with air drones and bombs, guided bombs and missiles. And Ukraine, as President Zelensky said, needs at least 2 Patriot system, air defense system Patriot, to protect Kharkiv. 2 systems to protect Kharkiv, skies over Kharkiv.
Do you think that the Allies will be willing to heed his call? I mean, given how expensive these systems are on the one hand, but also how many of these systems the United States has produced, is it too much to ask? Like, 2 systems to protect the population of over 1 million people, the second biggest city in Ukraine. What would be the excuse of of Ukraine's allies not to provide them? I'm wondering, because they should be there ASAP. I mean, this is quite kind of baffling that they are not on their way already, unless there is something of which we don't know yet. I mean, these things are supposed to be confidential, so I hope that we're going to learn that these systems have been delivered fairly soon. But what is your expectation in this regard?
We know that allies in Europe and in America, they have at least 100 Patriot systems. And Ukraine, a couple months ago, Zelensky asked for seven to protect skies over Ukraine, just 7 extra additional. There was only one promise by Germany, couple more by the United States, but they haven't been delivered yet. And Spain provided a promise to provide missiles for Patriot systems. That's where we are. Out of 7 requested Patriot missiles, additional Patriot missiles, air defense systems, 3 or 4 have been promised but not delivered yet. And meanwhile, Russia is targeting Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure. Today, for instance, there will be the first difficult day of switching when industrial objects, plants, factories will be gradually switched off from electricity grid, and private consumers also will be cut for several hours a day now. So Ukraine now in the mode of saving electricity, of protecting its electricity grid, and consumers, both industrial and private, will feel that Russia is actually successfully targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
So that's a very important point. I believe there is no excuse for not delivering these systems. I mean, I understand that some countries may have reservations with regard to cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, even though also they should be delivering them anyway. But Patriot systems, I mean, you can't really use them offensively. It's purely about air defense. So, I mean, the Allies should absolutely pick up the pace and get them to the front line. Now, especially since when Ukrainians do have the weapons that they need, they know how to make best use of them. And this brings me to Crimea. Now we're moving to another part of Ukraine where there have been tangible successes. Reports of Russian warships going down, reports of fuel depots being destroyed using ATACMS missiles, and also a couple of Russian fighter jets, including the dreaded MiG-31, which is used to launch aeroballistic missiles, again, against energy infrastructure and civilian targets. So can you tell us more about this? Because this is like the sort of counterpoint that, we're talking a lot about the dire situation around Kharkiv, but maybe people are forgetting that Crimea may be slowly becoming untenable for the Russian occupiers.
Absolutely. Ukrainians were very successful in targeting Russian airfields, oil depots. Also, Bilbek, the strategic airfield in Crimea, has been targeted recently with missiles. And just in the last 2 days, Ukraine, on the 19th, Ukraine successfully targeted Russian ship called Kovrovets. It's a minesweeper in Crimea. Also, another one apparently also has been struck, the Cyclone ship which belongs to Russian Black Sea Fleet. So -2 ships. And also the thing is with Cyclone ship that it was a carrier of cruise missiles, of caliber cruise missiles, which Russia actively uses against Ukrainian cities. And now with this ship, Russia has no carriers of cruise missiles in Crimea. All of them are now cornered to the eastern shore of the Black Sea, to the military naval base in Novorossiysk. Russia has now not a single carrier of cruise missiles in Crimea, primarily in the Sevastopol base. So at the Sevastopol base. So Ukraine successfully cornered Black Sea Fleet, and already more than 30% of Russian Black Sea Fleet has been destroyed by Ukrainian sea drones or missiles.
So this is excellent news. Now it remains to be seen what happens next, but we also know that the greatest threat now seems to come from the Russian aviation, right? Most of these missiles, in the absence of the ships that you've mentioned, will be launched by MiG-31s, by strategic bombers also. So these are a bit more difficult to get rid of, right? They are often positioned in bases deep within Russian territory. Ukraine doesn't have long-range missiles with capacity to strike these bases, but it does have drones. Do you expect these drone attacks to continue? Do you also expect that the allies, including the United States, will turn a blind eye towards drone strikes? I mean, these drones are Ukrainian anyway. They are not Western-made weapons. So all the escalation arguments, they do not apply here.
Ukraine doesn't want to hear much about, strike Russia or don't strike proper Russia proper. Ukraine is doing what it thinks it's the best for its defense and protection. So mostly Ukrainian-made drones have been used to target oil depots, airfields, and military installations on territory of Russia proper Russia. So Ukraine doesn't want to hear things like don't do that, don't do that. That's a fair thing. And also Ukraine has been very successful in protecting its skies from Russian drones. Just this night, 29 out of 29 drones launched by Russia has been intercepted by Ukrainian air defenses. So Ukraine has been developing its drone programs very successfully, but also protecting its skies from Russian drones.
So it's basically all about delivering the right equipment, not introducing unnecessary constraints, and allowing Ukraine to win. I mean, Ukraine has been more than capable of surprising Western analysts in many times, and I hope that we will still hear of many such successes that nobody expected, and yet, hopefully, they will come. So this is the overall assessment here. Rostislav Khotin was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas has spoken about shortages of military aid for Ukraine. In her view, the reason for this deficit is fear in Western societies.
In her statement, Kallas specified different types of fear: fear of military escalation, fear of nuclear strikes, and fear of migration. She particularly stressed the last type, saying one of Putin's goals is to make life in Ukraine as difficult as possible, so that Ukrainians leave their land and migrate to Western countries. She also called for aid and sanctions until Ukraine takes back Russian-occupied land.
Ukrainian attacks on Russian refineries are apparently working. Moscow has now reportedly been forced to import jet fuel from Belarus.
Belarusian oil refineries have significantly increased their output in order to help Russia with its shortages. The trains carrying the fuel have also received special protection from Belarusian authorities. Ukraine has been conducting a wide-ranging drone strike campaign against Russian oil refineries since January. The U.S. intelligence community estimates that about 14% of Russian production capacity has been disrupted so far. The assaults have been mostly limited to regions of Russia that are close to Ukraine and within the range of attack drones. However, some attacks have reached as far as Kaluga in the north, Ryazan to the east, and Tuapse to the south. Russian air defenses have proven to be insufficient to defend territory this vast. The U.S. has urged Ukraine to stop the attacks, citing impact on global energy prices.
The strangest proxy conflict yet might be taking place in a little-known region of the world. Separatist-inspired riots in the French territory of New Caledonia have reportedly been inspired by Azerbaijan.
Authorities in Paris have claimed that Azerbaijani actors have conducted a massive and coordinated online disinformation campaign, accusing French police of shooting pro-independence demonstrators. New Caledonia has been engulfed by riots conducted by the indigenous Kanak people who are largely in favor of independence from France. 6 people have been killed and hundreds injured in the violence so far, although French troops appear to have restored order. Azerbaijan might be motivated to fuel separatist sentiment in France in retaliation for French support of Armenia. Last year, Azerbaijan took over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region, which was the site of ethnic Armenian separatism on internationally recognized Azerbaijani land.
So far, 50 countries have confirmed their intention to take part in the Global Peace Summit on Ukraine. The event is to take place from the 15th to the 16th of June in Switzerland.
The summit has been organized by the Swiss government at the request of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Its goal is to establish a framework for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. While Russia has not been invited to attend, Nicola Bido, spokesperson for the Swiss Foreign Ministry, has stated that finding a way to include Russia in the peace process is one of the goals of the summit. Bido also stressed the importance of including countries from the Global South, which have not been involved in the conflict. President Zelensky has stated that his agenda for the summit includes energy security, securing free navigation on the Black Sea, prisoner exchanges with Russia, and the return of children forced out of Ukraine into Russia.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.